And the bottom line is that there's a relationship between the core of our planet. Our core is made of an inner solid core and an outer molten core. A relationship between the inner and the outer core, the mantle, which is where the magma comes from, and the crust, which is where we live. This is not a static relationship. It's a very dynamic relationship. And about every 13,000 years, there's a shift in the core that creates a turbulence in the mantle. So the liquid molten material in the mantle is compressed, and it actually seeps into the crust in weak places that we call plate boundaries and where the crust is very thin. And if you're on the Earth at that time, what it looks like is an increase in volcanic activity, super volcanoes.
I'd like to welcome back to the show returning champion, Gregg Braden. How you doing, Greg?
Alex, it is so good to see you today. Once again, I'm coming to you from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Some people think it looks like the command deck of the mothership.
It does.
Maybe, but I'm just going to call it our Santa Fe studio to keep me out of trouble here. So, hey, I'm excited to be with you. This is completely unscripted. We don't know where we're going to go, and we always know it's a good conversation. So thank you for your trust and for inviting me back.
Of course, my friend. Our last two conversations have been very popular. Specifically, our last one broke over 4.6 million views. So people seem to like when you and I have conversations, sir. So that's why you were invited back consistently. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. So my first question to you this time, sir, I wanted to just dabble. We've dabbled a little bit about it before. Antarctica and what is being found in Antarctica. We talked about that there are finding pyramid shape. Something's there. We really don't know what's going on. In your guesstimation or in your view, what do you think could have been there? Because Antarctica has not always been an ice block.
Sure.
It was flourish, green, and things. So what do you think happened to Antarctica? Like, was it a pole shift? Why is it frozen now? And what could have been there?
Well, those are three questions, three big questions. Antarctica is one of the last remaining continental mysteries in our world today. And it's fascinating because the truth is we really don't know as the general public and in open peer-reviewed literature. They're not talking about it very much. What we do know, Alex, is that with the oncoming of climate change, as the ice has begun to melt, the satellites have begun to reveal structures, complex architectural structures poking up through the ice. And these aren't primitive, huts and, hunting villages. These are massive, complex structures. As an amateur archaeologist, when I was in university, I didn't follow through with an archaeological degree. I became a geologist, but the archaeology was certainly part of that. And one of the first things I learned as I was going on the digs in college was that nature does not work in 90-degree angles. So you'll never see a river going one way and then do a 90-degree turn, and you'll never see wind erode in a 90-degree turn. Fluvial and water is fluvial erosion, and aeolian is wind erosion. That won't happen. And the reason I say that is because when we're looking at the satellite images from Antarctica, what we see are these massive structures of square rooms, square buildings, all 90-degree angles. They are not a fluke of nature. And the reason this is a problem is because the Ice Age peaked about 20,000 years ago. And this implies one of two things. Either the structures were built in the ice during the Ice Age, which is pretty unlikely. You don't see people doing a lot of that, or the structures existed before the ice was there. And the question is, we're taught that civilization began about 5,000 to 5,500 years ago in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, Mesopotamia, Samaria, and all of that. So the question is, who was building these complex structures in Antarctica over 20,000 years ago? And we don't know the answer. As a scientist, I have to say we don't. There's a lot of speculation. My personal idea is, but we don't know the answer. One of the reasons it's so exciting, Alex, is because it is presumed that these structures are very intact. They have not been pillaged like a lot of archaeological sites have been, in Egypt and, other places in Africa and South America. And geologically, it appears that this ice occurred relatively quickly. So whoever this advanced technological civilization is, and whatever it is that they base their civilization upon, the presumption is it is still there, it is still intact. And if we were to recover it, that we could learn a lot and it could benefit all of us. Now, that's the official, that's, where I'm coming from officially. My sense is that these sites have already been excavated, they've already been recovered, and they're simply not sharing it because it dovetails into what we call disclosure. Disclosure is the ongoing process of revealing our relationship with intelligence that is from beyond this world. And for some people, that boils down to UFOs in the Western civilization. When we talk to our indigenous ancestors, I have to tell you, Alex, every indigenous tradition I have ever been with, everyone down to a T, allow for a deep, a sacred and an ancient relationship between us here on Earth and a greater cosmic family. And it's an ongoing relationship, and they allow for it in their culture. They don't separate it out as a strange thing. It's when I'm in with some of these indigenous groups, they'll be talking about the harvest, the grains that they're harvesting. And then the next sentence, they'll say, oh yeah, and my grandmother was sick. We took her down by the water, and the space family came and healed her last night. And then we were able to, and then it's just like part of a conversation. It's not like some weird, strange hush hush kind of thing. So I think Antarctica, it is controversial because in the 1950s, it was militarized. And there was a treaty that we would not militarize it. And there's also a treaty that we would not militarize space and we would not militarize the lunar surface. And, I'm sure you've had guests on that have talked about how we've breached those treaties in the ways that we have. So what we know is after World War II, that there were German bases, there were American bases, China has a military base there. And technically it's for research, so they won't say they're militarized, but there's a lot of military activity, that's happening there. So when we look at Antarctica, we have to say what happened there. What would have caused the ice to occur if there was no ice in the past, and what's causing the ice to melt now? None of this is happening in a vacuum, and that's what makes it so interesting. So I'm going to approach this from a very high level as a geologist. I recently did a presentation on ancient civilizations. And all the speakers were identifying the rise and fall of the civilizations driven by some mysterious energetic force that is very poorly understood. We know the civilizations appeared and they disappeared because we're finding them and we're able to date them. The question is, what was driving that? It appears that at least a portion of what's driving this is coming from underneath our feet. Alex, it is a geophysical process on scales that we don't typically think about. And the bottom line is that there's a relationship between the core of our planet. Our core is made of an inner solid core and an outer molten core. A relationship between the inner and the outer core, the mantle, which is where the magma comes from, and the crust, which is where we live. This is not a static relationship. It's a very dynamic relationship. And about every 13,000 years, there's a shift in the core that creates a turbulence in the mantle. So the liquid molten material in the mantle is compressed, and it actually seeps into the crust in weak places that we call plate boundaries and where the crust is very thin. And if you're on the Earth at that time, what it looks like is an increase in volcanic activity, super volcanoes, earthquakes, And all of that triggers a change in the climate. And that is what we're looking at in Antarctica. So every 13,000 years, there's and we can go into more detail. I'm doing this at a high level.
Mhm.
There's a shift in the core of the Earth. The inner core oscillates back and forth and creates ripples in the outer core. That's what makes the magnetic fields of the planet. And those magnetic fields shield us from solar radiation, solar wind, cosmic radiation. We know that. And when these shifts happen in the core, it weakens that magnetic field. And there are a lot of implications around that. So 13,000 years ago, this is what was happening, creating what we call the Younger Dryas. We were coming out of the Ice Age, and we began warming to come out of the Ice Age, and all of a sudden, there was a tremendous drop in the temperature very, very quickly. And then that temperature rose again very quickly. And it's that drop that created the ice that we're seeing. And Siberia frozen, I mean, mammoths frozen in the middle of a mouthful of food. The food's still in their mouths, frozen in the middle of the steppe. These things happen quickly. So there's a shift in the dynamic of the core of the planet, triggering a seepage of the magma in the mantle. They're called mantle plumes that actually move up into the crust at weak places, the volcanic activity. And now we know there are super volcanoes that occur about every 12 to 13,000 years. What those volcanoes do is they thrust tremendous amounts of sulfur dioxide in a really short period of time into the atmosphere, reflecting the light of the sun, dropping the temperature of the earth, and that's what creates the cooling, the rapid cooling. That's why it doesn't take hundreds and hundreds of years for this to happen. It can happen, and some scientists now are saying it happens within a matter of days, that this can happen. So this is what it looks like triggered the Younger Dryas. Now there is another theory that it was triggered by a comet, and this is where it gets really interesting. There is a comet that occurred during that time at the beginning of the Younger Dryas. We know it was a comet, not an asteroid and not a meteor, because a comet, when it hit the atmosphere, it fragments. An asteroid or a meteor or meteorite tends to stay more intact and create, the kind of craters like we see in the Gulf of Mexico or something like that. So from the Arctic Circle all the way down to South Africa, we find fragments of this comet. And we know it's a comet for that reason. Also, the ratios of the minerals of things that come from extraterrestrial origin, from outer space, are different than the ratios of the minerals on the Earth. So the platinum that we find in these deposits, we know is extraterrestrial in origin. It's not Earth originated platinum. So we know that comet happened, and it contributed to what we call the Younger Dryas. However, that appears to be a one-time event. The cyclic nature of what's happening in the core is just that. It's the cyclic nature. You go back another 12 to 13,000 years, you see another super volcano about 25,000 years ago. And the same thing, you see the same thing with the temperatures. And then you go back another 12 to 13,000 years. You can do this all the way back to 72,000 years BP, before present. So there is a dynamic process under our feet. It is a natural rhythm that has triggered the rise and fall of civilizations. And the reason this is so interesting from a perspective of ancient civilizations is that it appears we have had many advanced civilizations in the past that succumb to the forces of this cyclic process. And if we know where and how to look, because the sea levels rise and our earth sediment overlays these things, if we know where to look under the sea level, and if we know where to look with earth penetrating radar, and this is exactly what's happening, we're beginning to see these. Interestingly, the civilizations that are happening during these times tend to go underground. And this may explain why Göbekli Tepe was buried all of a sudden, or some of the subterranean communities that we're finding now in the Middle East,
Turkey.
in Turkey, yeah,
In
in places like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, those are, and by the way, just to stop you a second, when you say underground dwellings, people are thinking, oh, it's a slight bunker or something like that.
No.
I forgot the name of it, but the area in Turkey, it holds 20 to 30,000 people. That's insane.
and food and animals and water
and air and everything with ventilations.
Yeah, multi-story ventilation, all of that. So why would they go through put the energy into building those places underground unless there was a need for that? I don't think they would do it just as,
but they wouldn't do it. But they wouldn't, and they also wouldn't do it if it was just a comet, because a comet happens quickly.
Here's the thing. It suggests that they were aware, at least some of these civilizations were aware of the 13,000-year cycle, and they weren't waiting around for it to happen to begin to prepare for it. Now, I just want to just say this right off the bat. As a geologist, where are we right now? This is the value of looking at the past. Where are we in those cycles? They occur every 12 to 13,000 years. The last one was 13,000 years ago. We are seeing the precursors of the same things that we've seen in the past. We're seeing the oceans warm, releasing gases into the atmosphere. We're seeing an uptick in magnitude 6 and greater volcanoes. We're seeing those things. Here's where my optimism is. I think for the first time, we have the knowledge, we have the wisdom, we have the technology to recognize what's happened in the past. And if we have the wisdom to embrace what that information is saying to us, that we can survive and thrive, not just survive, but thrive, this gives us an evolutionary edge that our ancestors may not have had if they didn't have just the right combination of the knowledge and the wisdom, the indigenous wisdom of the cycles, the cosmology, and the technology. And we do have the technology. Alex, I mean, we could do things simply burying and hardening our power grids would relieve a lot of the suffering from any of the extremes, the climate extremes that we're seeing, because they are so vulnerable. So when we have high winds, when we have ice on the power lines in the New England states every winter,
Texas, are you kidding? I live in Texas.
Okay, or even
they froze.
Exactly. Or volcanic activity, things like that. It doesn't stop what's happening, but it helps us to be better prepared if we have heat and light and cooling, and we can, cool our food, and we have our medical supplies and everything. We don't have the same impact as when people are just cut off from civilization and lose everything. I mean, that's just one simple thing. If we recognize the beginnings of a super volcano, and this is what was happening during the Younger Dryas. This was a super volcano. It's called the Phlegraean Fields volcano. It is in Italy, and there are 24 separate craters that are recognized right now inside the caldera, and it's not the first time that it has erupted. And there are other super volcanoes as well. We have the technology to outgas some of those, to relieve that gas and the magma, so it doesn't cause the damage. I don't think you can stop a volcano, but you can certainly, I think, modify how it's going to impact the world and impact life. We need common sense. We need to stop building on floodplains, stop building 30-story buildings 10 feet from the edge of the ocean, assuming the ocean is static, that the ocean levels are never going to change. We need, more than anything, we need localized living, community and localized living, not the centralized living that we're being pushed into through the policies that are now being proposed. Localized living means localized sources of food, localized sources of water, localized finance, localized income, and localized energy. So you don't have massive supply chains that are so fragile and so vulnerable to disruption. It doesn't stop what's happening necessarily, but when we live locally, as our ancestors did, it gives us the ability to take care of ourselves. And the stronger we are as families and communities, then we are strong to help those that may need that help and that may not have been as fortunate as we are. If we're centralized and those supply chains break, or the centralized source of our drinking water becomes contaminated, or our centralized power system, is compromised for whatever reason, where does that leave us? So I'm just saying, I'm saying this because I don't want people to be afraid of a natural rhythm and a natural cycle, but I think we owe it to ourselves to embrace the truth, the deep truth, that we live in a dynamic world of cycles, not a static world where everything is as it is and it will always be as it is right now. That it just doesn't make sense to even think about that.
So, Greg, let me ask you, with all this talk about these cycles, the Younger Dryas, ancient civilizations that were very advanced that might have come down, gone and come and gone, these cycles.
Sure.
What does that, in your opinion, how do you connect spirituality and our evolution as spiritual beings through all of this? I always call, I'm not the first to call this a game, a kind of simulation, a video game in a sense. And the field keeps getting changed, and it's getting more and more changed recently as Mario is trying to save the princess. So where do you think where does this all lead to as far as our spiritual evolution?
The definition of spirituality is probably a little bit different than what most people accept as spirituality. The definition of spirituality, it's all about relationships. It's about our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to other people, our relationship to the earth, our relationship to the past, to the future, our relationship to God. All of these come into play when we are faced as individuals and as a family, as communities, as societies, nations, as a planet. When we're faced with tremendous amounts of change, it pushes us to the very edge of who we believe we are, Alex, and we have to reach deep inside and discover what it is that's true for us and what's real for us. It forces us to identify the values that we cherish so that we can allow those values to serve us and support us in resilience. Spirituality is deeply linked to human resilience. And when we talk about resilience, I mean, we're opening up the door to a lot of conversations here. Mm-hmm. Resilience, when I was a kid back in the 1950s in rural Missouri, resilience meant if you're having a bad day, suck it up and get over it. That was your resilience.
Obviously. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Probably identify with that. Now there's a new definition. It's called adaptive resilience that is being pioneered out of the Stockholm Resilience Institute. And they identify domains of resilience. So there is a physiological domain. Obviously, our bodies have to be fit so that we can bear the brunt of whatever stress is coming to us. And that's always true, but it's true now more than ever, Alex. I mean, I think one of the greatest gifts we can give to ourselves is be the best version of ourselves. Get fit, get healthy. Stop doing the things that destroy life in our bodies and destroy our children's bodies. Just stop doing those things. No. And, that's a whole podcast unto itself. We can talk about specific principles. That's only one aspect of resilience. That's physiological. Then there's mental resilience. There's emotional resilience. There is psychological resilience, and there is spiritual resilience. And all of those domains are necessary for us to thrive in the time of extremes. And the spiritual aspect of that tells us that we are more. We are more than the greatest challenge that we will ever face, and that we are made for times just like this. We are literally wired to thrive in times of extremes. And this is what's so unique about the human body. Our young people aren't being taught that. They're being taught that we are a flawed species, that humanness is a flaw in of itself, and that we need something outside of us to protect us and to help us. And that something is technology. So young people think they've got to have computer chips, in their brain, or they've got to have sensors under their skin or chemicals in their blood to compete. And this is the thinking now, I think, that really limits us when it comes to where we are right now. So when we talk about resilience and spirituality, there's a direct link between spirituality, resilience, all the domains of resilience, and where we are in the world today. Because again, this conversation isn't happening in a vacuum. We're living a time of extremes. Doesn't mean only bad things are happening, or even good things for that matter, but it does mean big things. Big things are happening that we've never seen in this generation. And we have everything that we need to thrive through those big things successfully if we look to ourselves and awaken the deep truth of the potential within each of us. If we buy into the lie that we are powerless victims of a world that we have no control over, then we become vulnerable, we become frightened, and we give our power away. We become vulnerable to other people's ideas and their agendas of what the world should look like and what our lives should look like. So all these things are in the mix right now. And this is why I think it's important. We can learn from the Younger Dryas, and then you go back 13,000 years and the same thing happened before. Another 12,000 years, same thing happened before. We are not divorced from the rhythms of the past, and we are not separate from the cycles of change. We tend to think that, oh yeah, all that was way back then, and we're modern people now, and none of that has anything really to do with us. And as a geologist, this is where I maybe have a little bit of an advantage, because geologists, earth scientists, are conditioned to think in terms of big cycles of time, whereas maybe social scientists and other sciences look in a little bit more limited periods of time. I'm also a systems thinker. I like to look at the big picture to see what's driving the processes in my life and society, politics, religion, and then from that big picture, zero in on the nano moment of our lives to see what our options or what our choices are. So all these, you can't separate them. They're all part of the big picture. And by understanding what happened in the past and recognizing the dynamic forces that have driven this change in the past, number one, and there's a lot of pushback on this. Not all scientists are on board with what I'm saying to you. Although the evidence, this is peer-reviewed science, the evidence is out there. The evidence, there's tech papers just showed in March of this year that the oscillations in the core of our planet have slowed and possibly stopped. And it doesn't mean we're going to have a pole reversal, but it means there's a shift that's going on. Tech journals are showing that the glaciers in Greenland are warming from underneath, that the mantle is warming the ocean. It's not coming from the atmosphere down. This is peer-reviewed science. And so as we embrace that, number one, then number two, we say, okay, that stuff's happening. Okay, that just happened. That just happened in the Younger Dryas. Where are we today in the cycles? And how can we work together as a community, as a global community? Do we love ourselves enough to embrace the truth and be honest with ourselves about what our history shows, so that we can thrive in this rare and precious and exceptional moment in history? So I think that kind of brings it all together.
Absolutely. That's very, very well said, Greg. What's interesting is when you said extremes in this generation, I'm a little bit younger than you. So I didn't hang out in the 50s, but I hung out in the 70s and 80s. And the time from when I was a child to where we are now, the amount of extreme change from to be fair, from the 1900s to the 1950s, there was an extreme change, but it's not as massive of an individual change, because yes, technology was growing, but the amount of information we have is extreme. What's happening right now weather-wise is extreme. What's happening politically is extreme. What's happening with money and governments is extreme. There's so much shifting going on that to become resilient to that is very, very important.
Yeah, well, it is, and it's not just our imagination. I mean, I was talking about, I was a geologist for a company at that time. It was called Phillips Petroleum back in the
I
1970s.
remember.
I was a problem solver during the first energy crisis when
So-
oil from the
70s.
Middle East was cut off, and America was rationing 10 gallons of gasoline per week is what we were allotted. And I'll tell you what, the muscle cars that we had during that time.
Not so much.
I had a 1969 Pontiac GTO with a 400 cubic inch engine and
beautiful.
it was a beautiful machine, but 10 gallons of gasoline wasn't going to
Get you
last me a week.
Get you about a mile.
Yeah,
About a mile.
Yeah, well, because I was driving back and forth to school, I had a job in a copper mill in a factory, and it wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
So I was a problem solver during that time, and we knew. I mean, the scientists knew at that time that we were in climate change, and they raised the flag. But the thing is, nobody was listening. The scientists didn't have a platform like you and I do today. So it was published in the tech journals. It was no secret. And the unfortunate thing is that the true pieces of the information have been incorporated into false assumptions and projections, and then hijacked and politicized to incite our nation and other nations into making choices that benefit a handful of people and really cause a lot of suffering for a lot of other people. And my whole question is, how can we solve the problems if we're not honest about the problems? And we are in it. We are in this change. So what I was saying was, during that time, we knew that we were living a convergence of cycles, a rare convergence. Climate is only one of those cycles. We're living a convergence of economic cycles, and economists that are watching this, they know Kondratiev cycles. They know exactly what those Kondratiev cycles are and the rhythms of those cycles. We're also living the convergence of a cycle of human conflict. And this is fascinating. When I spoke at the UN, they were not aware of this cycle. They said, doesn't conflict just happen spontaneously? And certainly it can. But if you look at human conflict, it follows a precise sinus rhythm, and the peaks and the troughs of those waves are where the great wars of our past have started. It's where they've ended, and they coincide with magnetic cycles from our sun, which influence magnetic fields of the earth, which influence magnetic fields of the human heart and the human brain. And here's what that means. Bottom line, the stronger the magnetic fields, the more peaceful we are, the more we're willing to cooperate to solve our problems. The weaker the fields, the more aggressive we are, the less cooperative we are. And we happen to be just coming off of the trough of one of the weakest magnetic cycles. So it doesn't mean we must have conflict. It means we are vulnerable, we are susceptible. But listen to this, Alex, it's also the greatest opportunity for peace. Because when we are in these very delicate places on the cycles, if we recognize where we are, if we say, yeah, we're at this vulnerable place in the cycle, let's become really good listeners. Let's listen to other people's ideas, and let's offer the olive branch of benefit of a doubt when that happens. And this isn't just between nations. This is between people. This is happening under the roof of every household, of every family, everywhere in the world. It's also happening within ourselves, our own inner conflict. All of this is linked. Sociologically, it's all linked to these fields. So the point is that all of these are converging. Conflict, economy, climate, they're all converging right now. And that is why this is a time of extremes. It's a rare and precious moment in the history of our civilization when there's an openness for new ideas. This is when innovation is so powerful. One person can have an idea, and the openness to accept that idea can change a planet. Now, I just want to say that I'm going to talk to our young, may I look in the camera and talk to our young people directly?
Please.
I have spoken with so many young people recently who tell me they do not want to bring children into the world because of the way the world is right now. I sat next to an Air Force cadet on a flight, and had this conversation. And he said he and his wife would never bring children into the world. And he told me why. And I said, I understand that. I hear what you're saying. I said, but have you ever thought about this? And I said, what I just said to you just now. I said, we're living this rare moment of extremes. I said, this is a time when one life could have the insights and the innovation to turn everything around and to bring beauty and peace and prosperity into this world. I said, why would you deny a soul the opportunity of coming into this world right now? The plane landed. I saw him in baggage briefly, and he was dashing off. I said, man, where are you going? He said, are you kidding? He said, after that conversation, I'm going to go home and make a baby. And so I want to say this to young people. This isn't the end of the world. It's the end of a way of living. We have stretched a way of living to the point of unsustainability. It's like a big rubber band. Something's got to give. And when it gives, it's the beginning of what comes next. And that's why we need you. And we need those babies. We need new ideas and innovation. And now more than any time, there's a receptivity to that because we have the technology through the internet and through all the ways that we communicate to share the ideas. The scientists of the 70s didn't have those outlets to share their ideas. They were limited to, in America, it was 3 major television stations. It was it ABC, CBS, and
NBC.
NBC. Yeah, if you didn't see it there, it didn't happen. And now, so fortunately, that's no longer the case. So I know it can look dark to some people because of the algorithms and what the information they bring to us. But there's so much good news, so many new innovations, so much new technology. And to live a single lifetime, Alex, where we bridge that world of the past that worked so well, it got us to where we have to say it worked. We're here. It got us here. To bless that and let it go because it no longer fits, and then to embrace the new world that's emerging. And the beauty is that new world's not here yet. So we're creating it. We're choosing it. And that's why we need young people. We need young minds and young hearts to influence those templates for whatever that new world is going to be. So let's all go make babies. By the way, we don't have too many people on the planet. What the new studies are showing, UN statistics are showing that we are at a crisis point of infertility. Birth rates have fallen off the cliff. And we need 2.1 babies per woman just to maintain the population level we have now. And we've dropped below that 2.1. We're going to peak out in 2050 at about 10 billion people. And then after that, if something doesn't change, we're in a steep, steep decline. So it's not that far away. Not that far away.
Greg, as always, we could talk for at least another 6 hours. But I appreciate you so much coming on the show again. And this has been a fascinating conversation, as it always is. Where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing in the world, sir?
Sure. Thank you, Alex. Well, my website, www.gregbraden.com, GREGGBRADEN.com. That 2 G's means that I am a Greg and not a Gregory. 1 G is short for Gregory, and my mom's wanted me to be a Greg. So gregbraden.com, and everything you need to know about where I'm going to be and what I'm going to be doing is right there, that one-stop shop.
And Greg, do you have any parting messages for the audience about all this amazing conversation that we've talked about?
Alex, and to our community, our global community, and I consider you community, I consider you my family. These are big conversations. They're big ideas. I think it's important to talk about them. And I also think it's important to bear in mind, ultimately, it all comes down to us. We are learning about ourselves in the presence of new technologies and new ways of thinking. And it's inviting all of us to come to terms with the deep truth of who we are and what it means to be human in this world, and perhaps for the very first time, to explore the deepest potentials of that humanness. So I think it's important just to bear that in mind, Alex, as a context, to keep everything kind of in perspective, because some of these topics, it's so easy to go down the rabbit hole and just get lost in so much of what's happening here. It really comes down to us.
My friend, my brother, I appreciate you and the work you're doing and the champion that you are to get these ideas out there in the world. So I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.